To reintroduce to you Mr. Fred Naftalie, who's actually going to tell us a little bit about his experience and his life.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good, very well. First of all, I bid you all a very jolly afternoon and a good afternoon to all of you. And thank you so much for coming. I also want to wish Dr. Wendtorf, who has arranged all of this, my greatest amount of thanks, and his lovely friend, Robin, who is also part of this complete ceremony, so to speak. Hello, Robin. And my daughter, my lovely daughter, who is here from Israel. She has sent her husband and her two grown children back to Israel, but she is here on her own to listen to what I have to tell you. Before I start my little speech, I'm getting a little comeback here somehow. I want you to realize what, as a young boy, 9 years old, I went through, just to give you an idea of what I went through, what it was like living under the Nazi Germany from 1933, which was the time that I was 9 years old, until I left Germany when I was not quite 14, and that was in November 1938. 1933, the year of President von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler German Chancellor. 1933, a state of emergency declared by Hitler in Germany was part of his coming, so to speak. 1933, all Jews were dismissed from all civil service jobs and denied permission to practice law. 1933 further was the dissolution, as we know, of the free trade union movements and the Masonic Order, of course, of which I am a member. Also in 1933, there was only one party in Germany, and that was the Nazi Party. There was no other party, not allowed anyway. 1933 further withdrew from the legal nations. That is also something to be very, very concerned about at that time. Now, 1934, Hitler proclaimed himself Führer and commander of the armed forces of all of Germany. In 1935, a year later, Jews were barred from all public parks. And I remember as a small boy, I wanted to sit on a bench, and the bench did not permit me to sit down because it said on it, Juden unerwünscht. Jews are not allowed to sit here. That was a great, great shame. Further, the Nuremberg laws and anti-Semitic laws were enacted too in 1935. And Jewish doctors and dentists were not allowed to practice medicine in German institutions. They were allowed to practice, of course, in Jewish institutions, but not in German institutions. So it was already, the anti-Semitism in Germany was beginning to be felt very, very dearly already by then. And of course, in 1936, this is immaterial, Germany and Japan signed a military pact. And 1937, for your information, Buchenwald, one of the first concentration camps, including Dachau and Mauthausen and several others, were opened up officially. And there was the annexation of the Austrian government into the Reich. That took place in 1938 further. And again in 1938, the International Conference in Evian, France. That was a conference called by 35 nations to see what they could do for the Jewish people who were being persecuted, but it came to no avail. It just washed away with itself. And of course, in 1938, the terrible Kristallnacht, where over 650 synagogues were burned and plundered and whatever else. And I was able to manage to get out 2 nights before that really happened. Let me give you a little story now, not a story, but a history of what it was like to live in Germany when I was a young man, a young boy. Now, I come from a family of 3. There was my sister, Gerda, my other sister, Margot, and my mother, of course, and myself. I had a very German Jewish family background. Although my mother came from Poland, she also came to Germany after she was a very, very young lady. And my father was born in Silesia, which is part of now Poland. Then it was part of Germany, and moved to Berlin after World War I. We owned our own business in those years. My father was a merchant, or a Kaufmann, what you might call a merchant, but he was also a furrier, a man that made fur coats. That was his other profession. My father was indeed a very staunch German, a German Jewish national. And before World War I, my father was a member of the Landsturm, which is an organization that comprises good veterans. Would you say good veterans? Yeah. And he served in the German army in World War I and was both decorated with the 2nd and 3rd Iron Cross. And he was also wounded in a gas attack, from which he then finally died. The fact that my father was such a typical German, it showed in many ways. For example, we were not allowed to talk Yiddish. Yiddish is a slang language between German and Jewish, but it's spoken mainly amongst Polish Jews and those that come from Eastern Europe. But it was not allowed to be spoken in my house. Can you all hear me? Good. However, my mother lit candles. We were quite religious on Friday evening, whenever the possibility arose. And we went to the synagogue in the Oranienburger Straße, which was one of the biggest synagogues in Berlin. And the synagogue was quite well known in the German Jewish community. We observed the Sabbath on Friday evening and Saturday. It was really nice to be part of it. We also sang Jewish songs, and we enjoyed our Friday night services. We had a very quiet, but a very secretive Friday evening, because by then already, because we lived in a generally predominantly Gentile neighborhood, so we tried to keep our Jewishness quiet, to be not to be known all over the fact, so to speak. We were Jewish, but we believed in it, but we wanted to keep it quiet to ourselves. I do remember we lived in a predominantly Gentile neighborhood. This was quite unusual, but because of the fact that my father had served honorably in World War I, I believe that at that time, the police and the Gestapo, I presume, were a little bit more lenient toward us. And it was a matter of the elections coming up, and my father, of course, voted for Hindenburg, which was part of the picture then. And the Weimar Republic, which was then, as far as the Jewish life in Berlin was concerned, the Weimar Republic was concerned. I recall that on several occasions there were street fights on our corner, and it was a problem getting around because of the noises that were made during the night, the shooting and the killings that were going on in those years between the Nazis and the communists and the monarchists. So it was difficult. It was quite difficult. At that time, I was 7 to 8 years old, and life was still fairly nice. Polish Jews tried to, they were like immigrants, and they tried to assimilate themselves into the German type of culture, and they succeeded partially. Now, my father died a very natural death in a Jewish hospital in Berlin on the 28th of November 1933. It was a very small but a very, very eventful event because on April 1, 1933, the Nazis boycotted all the Jewish shops. National Socialism in Germany became became known. When my father died, my mother tried to continue our business, and by the time we already were in the fur business, again my mother's share was closed after the Kristallnacht of 1939. That was when our business was closed. My mother decided to work for her brother-in-law. And after my father's death, my mother visited my family in Poland, 1934. I was about 11 years old, and it was the first time that I had met my maternal grandparents. My grandfather and grandmother was the first time I met them. My initial school years in Berlin, beginning in the spring of 1930, were actually quite uneventful. I went from the first grade through the 8th grade, and the school itself was sponsored and financed by the Jewish community in Berlin, well organized throughout Germany. In the pre-Hitler era, Berlin's Jewish community was well known, and Jews primarily from Eastern Europe were seeking refuge from the Jewish anti-Semitism that they encountered in their own countries, namely Poland and eventually even communist Russia. I went from first grade through 8th grade from 1930 until 1938 in Berlin to the Jewish school. My school was not very far from the main police station and within 5 minutes from the famous Alexanderplatz. I don't know whether that name sounds familiar to you or not, but it was a very, very famous plain like Times Square in New York. I walked every day to school. In April 1938, I graduated, and then I went to another month to a school called the Handelsschule, or the commercial school, in the Kaiserstraße, in the same school, in the same street rather. and I was determined to continue my schooling. However, it was made quite difficult for me because I was of the Jewish faith, and the school, the Handelsschule, was primarily Gentile, and after a short while, they threw me out of it. So I had no choice but to make a few pennies, and I went on my bike and did a few deliveries here and there, and somehow or rather managed to survive together with my mother and two sisters. That went on for a little while, and little by little, I became very interested in the Betar, which was a youth movement, a Jewish youth movement, and it made a fighter out of me, really fighter. And I fought anyone who had anything to say against Jews. Before the Nazis came to power, on January 31st, there were street fights, including shootings between the communists and the Nazis in front of our store. When my father had his business, our store was at the corner, and the fighting took place so close and very close to the store. When the Nazis came to power, I repeat that again, I'm sorry, I started to sense that there was something very, very wrong. I was already by then a little different. My mother and sisters were very jovial and trusting. As small as I was, I already had seen the writing on the walls. It was just my young bearing that told me that things are not going right in this country. But I did belong to the Betar, which was a very, very Jewish youth organization. My mother finally relented and made arrangements for me to leave Berlin and to go to England or Palestine, whichever came first at that time. When the Nazis finally shut down the Jewish schools, which they did in 1938, I was 14, and I had to go to a Gentile school. That is, when I personally started to having fights, and when I was called a Judenlümmel. A Judenlümmel is a Jew boy, the equivalent of that. Mach, dass du rauskommst. Leave the country as early as possible. I started to fight back, and of course my mother did not want me to, didn't want to see that. Fortunately, I belonged to a Jewish youth organization that gave me a sense of belonging, an identity, and the training to fight, the Betar, the Habonim, which was very right-wing, and we were all trained a little bit, and last but not least, the Hechalutz. My affiliation with all of these organizations probably was made for me to go to Palestine, but I did not go to Palestine. Yes, it was quite difficult already then. It was Theodor Herzl, and I'm sure that you've heard of that name, envisioned a Jewish state. During our youth meetings, we realized and discussed in very different organizations that Hitler was a threat to the Jews and that we needed to get out as early as possible and however and whenever possible. That is exactly what eventually I did. I can give you a large number of instances of anti-Semitism in the years between 1934 and 1936 and into 1937, when my mother owned the business. Most incidents I remember were quite severe. On several occasions, the store windows were smashed in, and I remember running out together with my two sisters who tried to shield us. I fought a lot and protected myself. However, I tried to keep myself and not necessarily instigate the fights. My mother told me to be quiet and to go and get involved in anything which has not to do with what is going on in Hitler Germany at that time. After the passing of the Nuremberg taxes in 1935, I remember one particular incident when I had to go to the dentist, whose office was right across on the corner, and from us. He said, "We do not treat Jews." The barber also refused to cut my hair. It was the law that we had to do the Hitler salute, even though we were Jewish. I used to evade this requirement by slipping into the doorsteps in between doors, so I wouldn't be forced to do it. My two sisters usually followed me. I remember that one day we walked on the streets in the late afternoon. We came home, all three of us, me and my two sisters and my mother, all and after a pack of Hitler youths came in with their swastika flags. My two sisters were rather scared, in particular my sister Margot. She ran into the doorway. I refused to do the Hitler salute. For some members of the group that came out and jumped me, They told me to raise my hand, and I refused to do so. I started to fight with them. I defended myself and hit back. I was beaten over the head with a short piece of wood. My other sister started to shout, and my mother came screaming in, and there was blood pouring onto my forehead, onto my foreface. My mother and some people tried to intervene. My entire family was taken to the police station in the Kaiserstraße, and my mother was fined 5 Reichsmark. And I did not do the Nazi salute. Of course, they did not arrest anybody of the Hitler Youth except us. My mother was petrified. I was not. I was really not scared in that sense. I used to fight back. Actually, I fought a lot. This is just one of the incidents that happened. The most serious incident that I remember happened right before I left Germany. I recall that my uncle came from Hamburg to stay with us. He was a medical student who was picked up in a raid and gave the police our address. So the police, that is rather the Gestapo, came to our house, and the fright, the terror, and the trauma went through was very, very severe. My mother told me to go and unlock the door. I remember opening up the door. My two sisters were standing behind them, and were standing behind me. And there in the Kreuzstraße, which was the name of the street where we stayed at, and as small as I was, and as scared as I was, and as petrified as I was, I ran my body into those two, and they fell over into the back of the stairway. And one of them even fell down the stairway. to this day, he tumbled and he tripped, both of them, and they both laughed. The Gestapo officer said, "Was macht denn du Judenlümmel? What are you doing, you Jew boy?" in plain language. Thank the good Lord, they did search our home, found my house, found my uncle, and took him away. I never saw him again. He died in the Holocaust. My mother blamed me afterwards for attacking the Gestapo officers. I should have done I should have done that, but my spirit, I couldn't take it, any of this, and I did fight. To come back to a moment of the Jewish youth movement. The Vitar, we shared the ideals that we were going on to Palestine. Again, in my instance, the visa to Britain came first. Otherwise, I would have had to land in Palestine. My first contact with the Vitar was in a school through other boys. The Vitar was a revisionist movement that inspired the foundation of the State of Israel on both sides of the Jordan River. We talked about Palestine when we spent the summer on a farm somewhere in Germany. I remember that there was a big picture of Trumpeter at the entrance. We also had to stand at attention. The Vitar wanted to make soldiers out of us already then, and there I was 10 or 11 years old. I felt very secure. I'm going to my country and my people, and I'm not afraid to do it. In 1938, we started to meet in secret. At this point, and all Jewish organizations were illegal. By then, there was already talk about the Great Britain and the possible Kindertransport. My mother saw to it that my mother saw what was going on in Germany by then, and now she wanted me out. And she registered me for the Kindertransport. You know what the Kindertransport is, probably? Is Neville Chamberlain, then Prime Minister of Great Britain, after a very heated meeting in the House of Parliament and the complete failure of the International Avian Conference, allowed up to 10,000 boys and girls under the age of 17 to enter Great Britain from Germany, Poland, and finally from Czechoslovakia. To those of you who are history buffs, and Chamberlain was the prime minister who waved the letter after his return from Berlin with Hitler, shouting, "Peace in our time," it was to no avail. And Nazi troops marched into Austria and clearly in Czechoslovakia in the summer of 1939, and on September 1939, upon a pretext of hypocrisy, invaded Poland, and with that the Second World War started. And to come back to the Kindertransport, 3 or 4 boys, and I remember, and 2 girls were the first unchaperoned boys and girls who left Berlin, the first unescorted Kindertransport in 1938. The actual fully escorted and chaperoned official Kindertransport left Berlin 3 weeks later on December 1, 1938. And that was how I, as a young boy, came out of Nazi Germany and into Great Britain. For the farewell in Berlin in November 1938, my two sisters and my mother were there. My mother gave me 10 marks, which all of us children were allowed to take with us. I gave 5 Reichsmark to the conductor of the train to look after us. She talked to him, and I went on the train, on one of those big, big trains. I opened up the window and I waved to her. That was the last time that I saw her. We went from the Lehrter Bahnhof in Berlin through Aachen and Bentheim. From Bentheim went to the Hook of Holland, and there we were there, 3 boys and 2 girls in the compartment who were then, like me, fresh leave from Nazi Germany. At the border of Holland, the train stopped and the Gestapo came in, and the border guards came in too with them, and I showed them my German passport and the big J that was in it, and they took that away from me, and my passport was no longer with me. So for 2 days before the Kristallnacht, I arrived in England in November 1938. All of this was very, very strange to me. My uncle picked me up. I remember him standing there in a long coat. He must have known who I was because he came over and took me by the hand, and we went to his house in Hendon. We lived there upstairs, and we had 2 bedrooms. And this goes on and on and on. So there's no stopping it. And I can go on and on for a long time. But I will stop now and will give the chair to someone else now, because there's a lot to tell, and I can't tell everything because it's too long of a story. So please forgive us, and let the next individual take over, whoever he is, and then take place then. Thank you.
So of course this is, as Fred said, like a long story, so we could spend hours and hours on this. But we actually would love to invite some questions that you might have based on the film, based on what you have heard, the life story, and we're trying to answer it as good as I can. I'm gonna help out with that. Okay. Just put the microphone on here. Perfect. Okay, yes, please.
Where do you live now, and are a citizen of what country?
The question was like, where do you live now?
What?
The question was, where do you live now? The question was like, where do you live now?
At this moment, the question is, where do I live now? At this moment, I live in Hallandale, and with my in Hallandale, Florida, yeah. And I have a place there, and I'm very happy and content. I also have my daughter with me here, and here she is. And I have my dear friend Aviv Mizrahi, with my very, very dear and old friend.
You also asked what country you're a citizen of.
And what country or citizen am I of? I am a German-born citizen. I was born in Germany, in Berlin to be exact. And I left Berlin with when I was in 1938 with the Kindertransport, which is the children's transport.
And citizenship of?
And I was a citizen of Germany.
And now?
And now I'm a citizen of the United States, of course.
And Great Britain. And Great Britain.
No more Great Britain. There's no more Great Britain now.
Okay.
Great Britain is all out. It's strictly the United States.
Okay.
Thank you, darling.
Okay. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. I do admire your admiration
question was like, did Mr. Naftalie help in the Brichau, meaning like transporting Holocaust survivors to Palestine? Were you involved with the Jewish Brigade in transporting Holocaust survivors to Palestine? That was the question.
Okay, yeah. My part of the survivors having been transported to Palestine after they were freed from the camps was very, very severe, big. We had lorries marked with the Magen David and our various battalions, what we were with, either the 56, 57, 58 battalion, which was the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalion, and we went into the camps and took out prisoners that were healthy enough to be taken out. And the others we left in the various hospitals. We had our own doctors. I mean, the brigade had its own doctors, or the doctor staff was there to take care of those that could not go do it on their own, and they would be looked after by the staff. But eventually, they all landed up in Eretz Israel. Eventually, yeah, including all of the sick people. They all landed up in Eretz Israel.
Okay, let's take the next question. I'm just going to switch from one side to the other. Yes, please, ma'am.
I would like to know your age and now. And number two, I want to know about all the things that are on your hat.
Oh. All right. Well, where do I start?
How old are you?
I'm 89, so I'm quite old. So the brigade, the Jewish Brigade was given me by, not only me, but by 50 to 60 other German Jewish boys in Great Britain, where we trained, and where I was, by the way. And the Chayal and the Jewish Brigade group emblem was made in Great Britain for us, and so was the Magen David, the blue Magen David, and they were all given us when we matriculated, also when we became soldiers, or when we finally did our soldiers in the end. We were all given that, and we were given. I can only talk for the ones that were together with me, and we were about 40 to 50, maybe 60 young Jewish boys from Germany who joined the brigade simply because we wanted to fight the Germans. So it was us. Was anything else? The brigade hat? Okay, yeah. Well, all right. And we had the Magen David, of course you all know that, the blue, white, blue. We had the various stars that were given me in the fighting. The 3rd Battalion, which was my battalion, was quite active during the World War II. We fought the Germans on several occasions, and hand to hand, even for that matter, and it left very, very bad memories, and I prefer not to talk about it. I hope you don't mind.
Okay.
Now the only other thing is that just to give you an idea of what the stars mean, or the emblems mean, the first star is the 1939-1945 Defense Star. The second one is the Italy Africa Star, which is where I was too. The third one is that I was wounded, is number 3 in my stomach. Number 4, the was can you get it back on again?
Yeah, I can hold it.
Oh, it's out. It's out, yeah. The start, yeah.
Technology. Okay, there you go.
Ah, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's the fourth. And the last one was the last star was the Italy and the European star. Those were the 4 stars, yeah. That were given me, yeah. And the top ones, the old-looking ones, are identical. There's one at the bottom here, the civil defense, which was the one that I was given because of my having been in Great Britain during the time when the Blitz was on, and I was given this star too on top of it, yeah, on top of all the others. And Zocher, of course, means never again. You probably know that. And of course, the regiment, the round with the leaves, with the eucalyptus leaves, was the badge of the Palestine Regiment, of which there were originally 3 before the brigade was formed. The original brigade, the Jewish Brigade Infantry Brigade Group that fought in Italy, was a brigade that had originally was a Palestine Regiment at first, which was formed in Palestine, in Egypt, and all they did was train and train. They never did any fighting. They wanted to, but somehow or other the British government didn't see fit to put them into the front. But when things got really bad during the Africa and Rommel campaign, they did put them into action, and they were doing transports and various other very important military factions that helped the war effort in those years. And other than that, were there any other stars? No, that was the only one. There was no other stars, yeah.
Some more questions, yes.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to pretend that you weren't Jewish, and why?
Did I?
Okay. The question was whether Fred Naftalie ever had to pretend that he was not Jewish, and why.
On one particular occasion, I was taken prisoner for a very short while by 2 Germans, and they started to ask me questions about the Jewish Brigade, and I avoided that answer and said that I'm a British soldier, although I had my Jewish thing on my shoulders. But I was in that position. I was in that position, yes.
Okay. Yes.
Did the Nazis know about the Jewish Brigade from the very beginning, or were they kind of surprised about this?
Well, the question was, did the Nazis, that the Nazis knew about the Jewish Brigade, or were they rather surprised?
The Nazis did know of the Jewish Brigade. They made a joke of it, and it certainly wasn't a joke to them, but they did make a joke of it. Hitler even did make a joke of it, and so did Goebbels, and for that matter Goering too. What did he call them? What was it?
It was like the Jüdische Plattfußbrigade.
Something like
that.
that.
Flatfoot Brigade. That's like what the official terminology was.
Something to that effect, yeah.
And of course, they were, pretty shocked when they realized that, they were facing fierce fighters.
Oh yes, they were facing Jewish fighters, all right, believe you me. We made short work of them. Very short work. Any other questions?
Oh yes. Let me go all the way to the back.
I was
Me?
Either one.
What expectations did you have of America when you knew you were coming here?
The question was like, what expectations did you have when you came to the United States?
What I had? What expectations did I have when I came to the United States? Well, I had only recently came out of the British Army. When the Jewish Brigade disbanded in 1946, I had to continue serving in the British Army, which is when I entered the Interpreters Corps and acted as a dolmetscher or an interpreter at the war trials and things of that nature. When I came to the United States,
What did you expect?
Prior to my joining the services, I was a shtickle furrier in the fur business. I took care of you ladies in those years, and in my own little way. And I was an apprentice, of course, but I finally found my goal in New York in the fur market, where I started to work proper in the fur trade, and I joined the union and I became a furrier. And that was the end of my field. But the end of my stay in my field. Is there anything else that I can say to that?
Let me see. Let's move back to the other side. Yes, please.
So this film must be many years in the making. The people that are still survivors from the Jewish Brigade, do you have any kind of reunions with them? And will this film be available for people to see in some capacity who weren't able to come today?
This is a very, very good question, and I will look into it if there is still a film available to this day that will give a reunion or a get-together of the brigades remnants, and there are any number in the three battalions, and where they meet, if indeed they still meet, I will make that inquiry, and for my own good even, because it's very interesting to know, since I've spent so many long times of my life in the brigade, I want to see myself if it's still in existence or if it's disbanded or what. I don't really know. After I was discharged, I lost touch, so I can't really say if it was what happened there. I really can't say.
Okay. Yes.
Oh.
How do you feel about the British government, given how they treated the brigade and survivors and all? Okay.
The question was like how Mr. Naftalie feels about the British government, given the fact that their critical attitude towards like Jews in Palestine during those years.
It was pretty.
How did you feel about the British? I mean, given the fact that.
That's it.
How did I feel about the British? Well, I became a British subject. That's very important, simply because after the brigade was disbanded in 1946, I had to join the British Army because my number was not up yet, and mein Unglück, my misfortune, was that I joined the Middlesex Regiment, which was at that time part of the Unruhen, the disturbances that took place in Israel in those years. The Middlesex Regiment had something to do with the guarding of the airports and various other important factors at that time, and I was in this regiment, and because of that, it made it very uneasy for me because of the fact that although I was already then, no, I was not in Great Britain, I was in Europe yet. That's right. Even though I was in Europe, it was very unfortunate for me to be part of that regiment because I was involved in rescuing from the DP camps people that were came out of the lagers, came out of the camps, and that was also part of my job because of the fact that I spoke German, and they utilized me as a dolmetscher at the time, as an interpreter. So it was a very sad moment, but there was still, it was still a part of my background these people came out of the camps and they had it very bad, and words really leave me. I can't even describe to you the moments that I went through in those years by having explained to British officers what these people had gone through, because I spoke German, obviously, in the Middlesex Regiment, what these people had gone through, how emaciated they were, how displaced they were, and they were even though they were in the displaced camps, they were hungry, they were half naked, and it was terrible. It was really, it was shockingly terrible. And I'm sorry to say the British weren't altogether that easy with them either. They gave them a very difficult time. And by giving them a difficult time, they did the same with me. They gave me a difficult time because I was involved in their not interpretation, but in their interviews and the total being where they were in the DP camps and moments of despair went on very frequently. And, of course it did, yeah.
Did he locate any of his own family after the war?
Yeah, one of the questions was, were you able to locate any of your family members after the war?
My family, my one sister was killed in Auschwitz. My other sister, I don't know, she went to Lodz, Litzmannstadt. My mother went to Riga, and there she was lost. So all three, I don't know. That's I couldn't pinpoint exactly where my mother died. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where my sister died. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where my other sister died.
When you still lived in Germany, you had a sense, even as a boy, that the way that people were getting treated was wrong. How do you feel about, I guess, society today, or how hopeful are you when you interact with people, I guess, in relation to the way that people are treated, the bigotry and the hatred?
Okay. Well, based on, and let me rephrase it well, based on your experience in Germany, you saw, how you were mistreated. And this is a general question, how hopeful are you for mankind that, if I get this right, that, we will overcome hatred and bigotry?
With Israel now being in the state that it is, I feel very hopeful that our future for us, and the fact that we have the state of Israel, which is now going to be 65 years old, unberufen, is going to stay for another 200 years, or who knows, forever. And I feel very hopeful that those of us who've survived all of that, who've come out that much stronger than we did prior to all of this, prior to Hitler and prior to National Socialism and all that went with it, that we are now going to come out a lot stronger and a lot more resolute with what we plan to do in future years, with what goes on right now with the Palestinians and with the Arabs and with all this tumult that is going on now in our beloved Israel. So we only hope and pray that things will work out normal and that they will have common sense, and that now finally, maybe now finally, peace, what we know as peace, thereby who knows whether that will ever come about in our lifetime or maybe in some future lifetime. Sooner or later, I presume, the Arabs and the Jews will have to make some kind of peace with each other if they want to live together in harmony. This cannot go on forever. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, number one, for either side. And will it solve any problems? It will only make it worse, in my estimation.
So you haven't lost like the hope in mankind despite that?
I haven't. No, I have not lost hope in mankind. Although, who knows what's ahead of us now, with what's going on now. Thereby, who knows? We hope for the best. We hope that things will calm down somewhat. We hope that there is enough common sense with Netanyahu, that he will make it relative to into not so much our favor, but in the favor of for everyone concerned, so that we can live in peace. There should be Shalom of the Erde. You know, there should be peace already amongst all of us. We've lost so much already, and that it's time that we sit down and, if they want to, sit down and discuss peace and the meaning of the word, and that it should only be there in future years to come for our children, for our grandchildren, for yours and ours too. And here you are.
First of all, I'm a Florida girl who never wore a fur coat. I'm sorry. I have no question. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for your courage in the Jewish Brigade, but your courage for speaking to us, telling your story. There's a lot of young people who are hearing your story. It's very inspirational, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
Can you take about 2 more questions?
Ask whatever you want.
After the service in the British Army, why was it that you came? After your service in the British Army, why was it that you came to America instead of went to the Palestinians or Israel instead?
Can you get this? Now, what did she ask?
She asked, like, why didn't you go to Palestine? Why did you go to America?
Why didn't I go to Palestine then in 1938 and instead of coming to America? A very good question, a very, very good question to me as an individual. I wanted to get out, and what came first, this is my place that I got out. First came the United States, and to Palestine I then came when I joined the Jewish Brigade. So that was my next step. I came to Palestine, I came to America. I made my first living here. I came to an uncle of mine who was in New York, and then I decided to see whether I could join the brigade, which was then formed in 1943, 44, and I did join the brigade. And I did go to Israel and to Italy to do my fighting then. So I did do my part, you see? And why didn't I live there? Which is your next question, most likely. Maybe, you see, in 1948, Palestine, it was still Palestine then. It was a very, very serious, a very difficult country to live in, as you well know. The country was on the verge of starvation. It went through the war, and I went through a war already. So maybe that in itself provided enough fuel for me to go back to England at that time. Although in England we also suffered the austerity that Palestine went through. So who knows? Do I know the answer? I was all by myself. My family was all wiped out. I had my cousins in Israel, here in Palestine. Eventually I came here. I mean...
Okay. A last question. One last question, yes.
Have you been back to Germany?
Yes. Have you been back to Germany?
Have I been back to Germany? I was invited on 2 different occasions to Berlin, where I was born. I expect to possibly be invited once more to straighten out matters that need to be resolved. Other than that, I have no reason to go here. Other than that, none whatsoever.
Can I say something?
Yes.
My grandfather is buried in Germany, and my father used to go back to visit his grave. And as a family, we were all invited to the opening ceremonies of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which was on September 11th, 2001, September 10th. So we all went back as a family. And other than that, my dad used to go back when it was still part of East Germany and to visit his father's grave, because his father is buried there in a cemetery that was not destroyed. And speaking as the daughter of my dad, I think what he said was also after the war, he came to America, he was alone, and it wasn't easy. And I'm sure coming from England and from the army where they had rations and everything, America was a great place to be. So why not start a fresh life there? I made my choice to move to Israel in 1983, and that's where I live now.
Okay, thank you so much.